for those of you who don't know me, I'm Sky, and today I wanted to talk about something that I think happens to quite a lot of ADHDers, and I think at the moment, just humans in general, right? And it's something called burnout. And if you've never heard the word before, what does that mean to you? Like when you hear the word burnout, put it on a piece of paper, what shows up for you? What kind of thoughts come up around it? What kind of feelings come up around it? What do you notice happens in your world, right? Because to me, ADHD burnout is something that, it's experienced pretty frequently. And yet a lot of the time we're not recognizing it. We're not talking about it. And we're definitely not taking care of ourselves in those moments, right? So for me, ADHD burnout is when I'm like, physically, I am just like, woof, not okay, right? Mentally and my thoughts, and not just my thoughts, but like my executive functioning, which is already problematic with ADHD, right? Like it's almost like I feel like I've lost my mind, right? You know that feeling? And then my emotions, like I feel like they just, normally they do this, but they come in waves, whereas it just starts to feel all messy. And then one moment I'm crying, and then I'm angry, and then I'm overwhelmed, and then blah, 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 right? Like the emotions, they just keep coming and coming and coming. And I think what then also happens after a long period of time with all of this stuff happening is, that exhaustion feeling when your whole body just like, that heavy feeling you get where you're just like, I don't think I can do anymore. Like I'm just fucking done. Like that exhaustion happens. And then we don't necessarily realize until we get to that point. And that can be the problem with ADHD burnout, is that we're not being mindful of what's happening along the way. And it's not till it almost slaps us in the face that it's in that moment that we think like we need to do something, or we make ourselves wrong for being in that spot in the first place. And so what I think is so important in ADHD burnout is to learn two things, right? One is like, what are your triggers, right? But the other part of it is, what are the warning signs? Like, what do I need to notice that is happening in my body, in my mind, in my world that indicates to me that I might be heading towards burnout? And I think this can be really tricky, right? Because let's be honest, we've got fucking ADHD. So we're not always self-aware. We're not always checking in. We're like 10 steps ahead or 4 steps behind. So we're not actually making time for ourselves to just notice. Be the observer, okay? And that's what I'm asking you to start thinking about scheduling in, right? Is like scheduling in being the observer of yourself. ADHD burnout, it's characterized by a few different things, okay? So if you're experiencing like overwhelming fatigue, right? Like more than you would normally experience, right? Where you just like, oh, my body's heavy, or I'm always like, if you hear yourself saying, I'm so tired, right? I just can't seem to have enough energy. I'm not motivated. I'm feeling lazy. Like listen to your language. There'll be little cues in the way that you speak to yourself or others that will hint to you that you're heading in that direction. For me this week, I've been like listening to my voice. It sounds really like different, right? And I've been feeling it in my body, and I'm just like, I'm tired, like not tired as in I need more sleep. I'm tired. There's a difference, right? And that's a beautiful warning sign for you to check in with and go, oh, what might I need to do with this, right? The other thing that can happen too is that we have reduced productivity. And we naturally have ebbs and flows with ADHD about we can do a lot and then we can do nothing. So that's not quite what I mean, but it's like looking for signs that are out of character. Like if you normally, and I use that term really loosely, but normally in your ebbs and flows, you can manage certain things that you're now not being able to manage. That's probably another warning sign that something's going on in the background, that maybe that you're not okay. Maybe you're doing too much. Maybe you've been around too many people for too long, right? Like there's something going on. Another thing is when you start to feel, that hopeless feeling, like, and again, it'll come up in your language, like, what's the point? Or, oh my God, is it always going to be like this? Or why is it always so hard? Like, you'll start to have words that indicate like, I'm in despair. I'm in this sense of hopelessness. I'm in this sense of like everything's on top of me and I just can't see my way clear. Yeah. Now, the other thing that can start to happen too is that the things that we normally don't find so challenging become even more challenging, right? And so for me, and Kim's on here, and it's a bit funny, right? It's my driving, like my driving becomes more challenging the more like burnt out I feel because I'm not clear and I'm not focused or I have negative thoughts and blah, 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 right? So again, like come into your world and just observe and notice, where am I feeling more challenged than usual, where I wouldn't normally feel it? And again, not from a place of judgment, but just from a place of noticing that something's going on. And while we know ADHD is, we struggle with either shifting attention, right, or maintaining attention. What we know when we start to head into burnout is that this amplifies and it gets worse, right? So we might be like, oh my God, like I am losing my mind. Again, listen to the language. Can't remember anything. I can't stay focused long enough to even tie up my own shoes at the moment, right? Like that starts to go out the window, right? Gone. The other thing is our emotions. And I think I mentioned this a little bit earlier that I noticed with myself is that, yes, we have natural ebbs and flows with emotions with ADHD, but instead of it just being up and down, we're like, I don't know about you, but burnout for me feels like all over the place, right? Or what I also notice in burnout for me, and I'd be curious for you, is that emotions or feelings that aren't normally my go-to start to show up, right? So for me, when I'm in my like normal ADHD zone, I'm like the anxious human. But when I swing into burnout, what I notice for me is I get more emotional and teary, right? And I might want to cry more, or I feel sad. So it's those emotions that we're not as familiar with. They start to show up again when we're moving into burnout. And then in terms of like motivation, I did another podcast on this around like, ADHD paralysis. And that can show up in like linking in with burnout. Like our motivation is just gone. Like we're overwhelmed. Our nervous system is shut down. And it's almost like we're like frozen. Like it's like, oh, everything's too much. Like I just can't do anything. Nothing kind of feels good, right? And then our performance at work might go down. We might look around the house and think, oh, fuck, normally I'm half on top of the washing and I'm not on top of the washing at all. Maybe we miss more of the kids' school appointments or whatever. Like whatever you normally have as a problem, it's like amplified, right? It just gets bigger and bigger and bigger and it just grows and grows and grows. The other thing that can happen in burnout is if you are naturally somebody who has any like medical conditions as well, whether you have chronic pain, that can flare up. If you have eczema, that can flare up. So anywhere in your body where you naturally have like problem points, right? Like maybe it's reflux, like whatever it is for you, it'll naturally start to bubble and show up and be worse than usual as well. Okay. And then the usual stuff, like we are more irritable. Our tolerance is even lower than usual. We're frustrated. Everything pisses us off. Everything is horrible. Everything sucks. Again, notice the language, because all of this stuff is just an indicator that there's too much coming in and you're just feeling really overwhelmed and overloaded and you are burning yourself out. Now, the other thing that we need to do is not just know what's happening in our body, like that's so important, right? But we also need to get really clear on like, what are our triggers? Like, what are the things for us that trigger the burnout? Because if we don't know what starts it off, then we're not going to know where to intervene or where to manage or where to ask support from. Okay. So if in this moment, or there's been a moment in the past where you've had burnout, what can be really cool, and I say cool because, I get really excited by homework and stuff, you may not, is to sit down and write, okay, I'm making it up, right? May 24th, that was burnout day. Now let's backtrack my month, backtrack 3 months, and actually have a look at what was going on in my world. right? And we might look for things like, where are the external stresses, right? Was someone in your family sick? Did someone sadly pass away? Did you get sick? Did the kids have something going on? Did you move house, right? Did you change jobs? Was there a new project at work? Did you have financial stress? Like, I could keep going, like, where in your few months was there external stresses, like stuff outside of yourself? And then what we want to look at is how many were there in like quick succession? Because sometimes, there might be one, but it's a big one. And so it trips us up. But a lot of the time with burnout, right, it's all of these little things that kind of build and build and build and build, because if we're really good at avoiding, right, and distracting ourselves, and we don't notice it until we get the big boom, right? So we've got to be aware of those little stresses, and not only aware of them, but check in with yourself. When that stress about finances showed up, what did I do? Like, did I manage it or did I avoid it? When that stress about that family member being sick showed up, did I allow myself to cry? Did I ask for support? Or again, did I avoid it? Did I use drug or alcohol to manage it? Like, looking at how we manage stressors, not just the external stressors, is actually important in figuring out too how we end up in burnout. Okay. Or maybe for you, you've had more, I call it like executive functioning difficulties, right? Like maybe you were sick, which means your brain isn't working at full capacity, right? Maybe you've had an injury and that impacts you. Maybe there's been more demands at work or with the kids on your executive functioning, and that's caused problem, right? Like maybe there's been so much sensory input because you've been in so many different environments that again, there's been so much taxing going on of your executive functioning. So check in, like maybe you've had assignments going on, maybe you've had to study more, maybe you've just started a new job, so it's been more taxing for your beautiful brain. Like check in and ask yourself again, move back a month, 2 months, 3 months. Has there been more like demands on my beautiful brain? Because again, if there has, going to impact that burnout, my friend, right? And then the other thing we want to look at, like, where has there been more emotional demands? Like maybe the kids have been sick. Maybe the dog, needed to go, our lizard needed to go to the vet like 6 times in 2 weeks, right? Like, where has there been emotional demands? Like maybe you're in a friendship that's really tricky. Maybe you're in a relationship that's going through a hard season. Maybe there's a work colleague at work that's really like tripping you up in some ways. Maybe your boss is a bit of a dick, right? I'm just making shit up. I don't know. But where has there been more emotional demand on you in the last, again, as I said, 1, 2, 3 months? Because all of that is going to be information again as to why you are like building up this level to the point of feeling burnout. And the other thing to look at too is like, has there been change? Like as ADHDers, yes, we get bored with the same, but we also can get really fucking overwhelmed with change. And you might be excited by the change or anxious by the change, but either way, it's the same system being triggered, right? And so maybe you've had, again, change of house or change in routine or change with the kids or change with the job or change with, I don't know, who's like supplying the coffee, because that's important in life, right? I'm just making it up. But if there's a lot of change, again, this can impact our nervous system, right? It impacts how we feel. Again, it can lead to us feeling super burnout, right? Or maybe you have been in a lot of different environments. And when I say environments, again, I'm thinking about like sensory overload. Like, have you been in really noisy environments? Have you been in environments where the smells are like, maybe you've just got a new job as a chef and the smell is like, oh, mother of God, like it's doing my head in, right? Or maybe you work at a daycare and you've had a kid that's been sick and they've been pooing a lot more, right? And it's like, because we don't often take into account with ADHD, like the senses. What are we seeing? What are we hearing? What are we tasting, touching, smelling? I think I'll get them right? If I didn't, you know what I mean? Like, has that changed? Has that been too much? Is there too much coming in? And your poor old little brain It's not being able to filter and manage and regulate because it's just on overwhelm, right? Like, a big person on a little bike and they're like pedaling really, really, really fast to try and get the bike moving so they don't fall over. Like, that's what it can feel like for our body when we're trying to navigate all of this stuff coming in, right? Or maybe for some of us, what can happen is that we're spending way too much fucking time masking, right? Masking is a big problem when it comes to things, not like just ADHD, but it might be like autism or like insert anything else, right? But hiding or trying to like make good with how you are when you go out, right? Like me, I'm like fucking loud and I'm too much and I swear. And if I spend too much time going, don't swear, don't say the wrong thing, don't blurt it out, don't be too much, don't do this, don't do that, right? Pressure, right? Masking and hiding who you are, it takes a lot of energy. And if we're doing that for a long period of time, every day or even all day, again, it's going to lead to burnout. Like ADHD, we are already struggling with executive functioning. We're already struggling with energy, right? We have too much, not enough, like it's all over the place. Then to add masking, which takes a lot from us, right? We're going to be fucking exhausted. And like go back over the 3 months and have a look, like what has been going on and where can I notice for me that I'm being super burnout, right? Because it's going to impact the quality of your life if you're not super aware of what's happening. Now, here's the thing, right? Like once we kind of identify the feelings and we know the triggers, like what the fuck do we do with burnout? Like how do we navigate it?